In today's video, I wanted to talk about invisible labor, or as Daniels described it, invisible work. I'll be utilizing an article from the Psychology Today website titled What Invisible Work Looks Like in the 21st Century by Janelle Wells and Doreen McCulley. I'll put a link in the description. It's a pretty short read, but worth checking out in full. In it, they detail ways in which invisible work impacts not only the individuals, but how the very work is essential to daily functions, not just in the home, but society altogether. So much of what goes on in the day-to-day is basically a never-ending checklist of activities, tasks that are treated with little to no regard outside of rare acknowledgments, if any. Yay, cleaning! And lip service for the most part. In my own personal life, I grew up in a family where both my parents worked. My grandparents next door, where I spent a good portion of my time, both worked as well. I got to see how they divided up their domestic labor of their respective houses, and in retrospect, I think it helped prepare me in some ways for being more aware of the minutia that goes on in keeping a house and home. Little details that come to mind are how Grandma would do all the cooking and Papa and I would do the dishes together, and how I would help with laundry, bringing in and putting away groceries. As I was recording that last bit, Fulton County had bomb threats called in to their polling stations.
Hi, America.
What I can contextualize now is not only was my grandmother cooking every day, but that she also drove 100 miles round trip to her job 5 days a week, came home, made dinner, washed clothes, tidied up, balanced the checkbook, made the shopping list, did the grocery shopping, and so much more. My parents worked opposite shifts at a plant, so I didn't really see them much aside from like the weekends for a good portion of my childhood. But they had their distribution of responsibilities as well. Similarly, there were certain aspects of their workload that tended to fall on my mom specifically, like arranging doctor's appointments, vet visits, parent-teacher conferences, and so on. But to fire off a list of chores and tasks isn't the main focus of what invisible labor is, but it is a facet of it, and that may be more readily accessible for someone who's trying to understand what it entails. But beyond the housework that's put in continuously day in, day out by individuals, there are a multitude of other less apparent and more abstract concepts that constitute invisible work in the office, classroom, job site, wherever. By not only adding to the burden of the job one was hired for, but an unspoken expectation that are placed mainly on women in the workplace and home, the consequences can be devastating. Going back to the article, this excerpt reads, invisible work can lead to emotional exhaustion, burnout, unhappiness, and a diminished sense of self-worth and identity. As individuals constantly juggle multiple responsibilities without recognition or support, it can blur work and personal life boundaries, impact satisfaction and engagement, and strain personal relationships. I feel like the way we're inundated with stressors of all variety, politics, finances, global concerns, interpersonal conflicts, traffic, you name it, we're already taxed and worn down, and that being overlooked and unacknowledged, all for that extra effort, can not only be disheartening, but it can be demoralizing and degrading. I spoke to my wife about this as I was working out what I wanted to say, and she pointed out how the intellectual labor of active concentration is another example, and how for neurodivergent folks that can be taxing in similar ways as physical labor, leaving people spent and leading to things like decision fatigue on top of just regular bodily fatigue, which I definitely agree with and have not only witnessed firsthand, but have experienced on a molecular level. The article closes with the following. We must challenge societal norms and expectations, perpetuating this work's invisibility. This involves reevaluating traditional roles, promoting work-life integration, advocating for fair compensation and recognition, and documenting our visible and invisible contributions so we can use data to communicate our contributions. Lastly, organizations and policymakers must implement policies and practices that value and support invisible work, such as flexible work arrangements, paid paternal leave, and equal opportunities for career advancement. Invisible work is integral to our lives and society, yet it remains hidden and undervalued. Understanding and acknowledging its existence can dismantle the structures that perpetuate its invisibility. It is time to recognize the contributions of individuals who performed this essential labor and work toward a society that values and supports all forms of work, making invisible work visible. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, checking it out, and being patient with me here. A lot going on, so, took a minute. But we got there, so we'll see you in the next one. Bye.